Emily sat alone in her small apartment, the silence wrapping around her like a thick fog. The city outside was adorned with Christmas lights, streets bustling with people buying last-minute gifts, and families hurrying to gatherings, but she remained seated in the quiet of her living room, her heart feeling heavier with each passing minute. Just the day before, her mother had called, a seemingly innocent call that turned her entire holiday upside down. "Honey, we've decided that we won't be having Christmas this year," her mother had said, the words falling from her lips like a weight. Emily had been stunned, unsure whether her mother was joking, but her mother's tone was serious, too serious to be anything but the truth. "We're not going to travel and no one will be gathering at the house this year. It's just too much for everyone with the current situation." Emily's mind had raced. Christmas without family? That was unheard of. They had always celebrated year after year without fail. But as she listened to her mother's voice, something inside of her told her that this was more than just an ordinary holiday cancellation. Her mother's explanation sounded almost too rehearsed, too perfect. Yet Emily, ever the optimist, had tried to push the growing suspicion aside. Maybe it was true, maybe it was the right thing to do given the state of things. She had wanted to visit, she had looked forward to it for months, but if her mother said so, it must be the right decision. So Emily had reluctantly accepted the news and stayed behind. She had canceled her plans, packed away the gifts she had bought, and made peace with the thought of spending Christmas alone. At first, she tried to convince herself that it would be okay. She could always catch up with her friends over the holidays. She would be fine, it was just one holiday, just one year. The first few hours of Christmas Eve had passed in a blur. Emily tried to work, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversations she had imagined having with her family. She wondered what they were doing, whether her siblings were together, whether they felt the absence of her in the way she felt the absence of them. The emptiness in her apartment grew as the evening stretched on. The faint sound of holiday music played from the radio, but it only made her feel more isolated. She couldn't help but replay her mother's words over and over in her head. "No one's coming this year." Her mother's usual voice, full of warmth, had been replaced with something distant, almost cold. She couldn't understand it. Christmas had always been a time for closeness, for family, for everything that made her feel connected to her roots. Without it, she felt like a part of her was missing. By the time the clock struck midnight, signaling the arrival of Christmas, Emily found herself sitting in front of the television, absent-mindedly flipping through channels. She had baked a small batch of cookies earlier, but they felt tasteless, like an attempt to recreate something that no longer existed. The soft glow of her Christmas tree lights flickered across the room, but instead of bringing comfort, they reminded her of the warmth she would never feel this year. She thought of calling her mother, asking if maybe the decision had been a mistake, if perhaps there was something she hadn't understood, but she hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to sound needy, to admit that her mother's words had hurt her more than she was willing to admit. Instead, she decided to wait, thinking that maybe her family would call her tomorrow. After all, Christmas was a time for surprises, right? But the phone stayed silent through the night, and by the time the morning light broke through the curtains, Emily's heart had sunk lower. Christmas Day, and there had been no calls, no messages. She got up, made herself some coffee, and tried to go about the day as normally as possible. It felt like any other day, except that the world outside was filled with joy and laughter, and Emily was left with an emptiness she couldn't explain. As she sat down on her couch, staring at the faintly glowing tree, she picked up her phone again. Maybe she had missed a message. Maybe her family had reached out and she hadn't noticed. But no, nothing, not a single word from anyone. She told herself that maybe they were busy. Maybe they had their hands full with all the holiday hustle and bustle. She tried to be rational, but the longer she waited, the more frustrated she became. How could they just cancel Christmas without a word? How could they let her sit alone without any explanation? It wasn't like them. They weren't perfect, but they always tried, especially during the holidays. Something didn't add up. And then, just as the loneliness seemed unbearable, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother, a simple text that read, "We're so sorry, sweetie. We should have told you earlier, but we decided to have Christmas after all. Everyone's here. Come home as soon as you can." Emily's breath caught in her throat as her eyes scanned the message. What? Her heart pounded in her chest. This didn't make sense. Was this a joke? Was this another trick? The night before, her mother had said everything had been canceled, and now, out of the blue, they were inviting her home. She felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. They had lied to her, left her in the dark, and now they expected her to just walk back in as if nothing had happened. Her hands shook as she typed back a message asking for an explanation, but before she could send it, her phone rang. It was her mother. "Emily, honey, I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm so glad you're coming. We just wanted to surprise you. We didn't want you to feel pressured. We love you so much." Her mother's voice was warm, but there was a hint of something else, something that made Emily's stomach churn. She felt both relieved and betrayed. How could they do this to her? As the call ended, Emily sat there for a long time, staring at her phone. Her family had never done anything like this before. Why would they lie to her about Christmas? And now that she was being invited, did it even matter? Was it really worth going home for? She got up, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. Christmas, it seemed, was full of surprises, but this one left her feeling more lost than ever. As she stepped out into the cold, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been broken, and no matter how much she wished it wasn't true, the cracks had already formed. Emily's hands trembled as she walked to her car. The thought of going home filled her with a mixture of dread and confusion, but she knew she couldn't let the situation sit unresolved. The drive was long, and the streets of the city seemed to stretch endlessly before her. She found herself questioning every decision she had made the past 24 hours, wondering why she hadn't questioned her mother's story more. Her mind raced with thoughts, each one building upon the last, as the miles between her and her family's home grew shorter. She had never expected something like this to happen, but now that it had, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to the story than they were letting on. She knew that her family wasn't perfect. They had their flaws, their secrets, but they had always been honest with her, at least to some extent. This, however, was different. This felt like betrayal. As she turned down the familiar streets of her childhood neighborhood, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. The house looked the same as it always had, the Christmas lights hanging on the porch in neat rows, the wreath on the door still shining with festive red ribbons. But for Emily, it felt like a stranger's home, not the place where she had spent so many happy holidays. She parked in the driveway and took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. She could hear laughter coming from inside the house, muffled voices filled with warmth and cheer. It only added to her frustration. She had been left out, forced to spend the holiday alone while they all celebrated without her. Emily stood there for a moment, the cold air biting at her skin, trying to gather her thoughts. She had been left in the dark for so long, and now they wanted her to just step back into the fold like nothing had happened. As she walked up to the door, her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she wasn't sure she was ready to face them yet. The door swung open before she had the chance to knock, and there stood her father, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Emily," he exclaimed, wrapping his arms around her in a tight embrace. It felt wrong. She stiffened in his arms, the warmth of the hug doing nothing to ease the ache in her heart. "What's going on, Dad?" she finally asked, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. Her father's face faltered for a brief second before he smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're just happy you're here. We wanted to make this Christmas special, honey." But his words didn't match the look in his eyes, the hesitation that lingered in the air. Something wasn't right, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon greeted her, but it only reminded her of the warmth that she had been denied. The living room was filled with family, laughter echoing off the walls as they gathered around the fireplace. Her mother was seated on the couch, her expression one of relief when she saw Emily. "I'm so glad you're here, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice soft, but Emily could hear the underlying tension. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was brewing inside of her. She didn't know whether she should confront them now or wait until later, but she couldn't let the moment pass without addressing the lie. She glanced around the room, noting that her siblings were there, all looking at her with varying degrees of surprise and guilt. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" she finally asked, her voice shaking slightly. The room fell silent, her mother's smile faded as she looked at Emily, a flicker of guilt passing over her features. "We wanted to surprise you, sweetheart," her mother said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily shook her head, the weight of the lie pressing down on her chest. "A surprise? You lied to me, Mom. You told me there was no Christmas, and now here I am and everything is just fine." Her father shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her mother before he spoke. "We didn't want to stress you out, Em. We know how much you've been working, and we thought that maybe you'd appreciate some time alone." The explanation didn't make sense to her. "You thought I'd appreciate being left out, that I wouldn't want to be here with all of you?" she asked, her voice rising. Her siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly not wanting to get involved in the conversation. But Emily could feel the weight of their silence, as if they all knew the truth but didn't have the courage to speak up. Her mother sighed and stood up, walking toward Emily slowly. "I know we made a mistake, and I'm sorry, but we wanted to do something special for you. We just didn't want you to feel overwhelmed or disappointed." "But you didn't even ask me what I wanted," Emily replied, her voice breaking as the emotions she had been holding in for so long finally spilled out. "You made all these decisions for me, and now you expect me to just be happy." Her mother's face softened and she reached out, pulling Emily into a hug. "We were wrong, sweetie, but we did this because we love you. We wanted to make sure you had a good Christmas, even if we didn't do it in the best way. Emily stood there, frozen in her mother's embrace. She wanted to believe the words, but the betrayal still lingered, the sting of the lie too fresh for her to fully forgive. I just don't understand, Mom, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth? Her mother pulled back, her eyes full of regret. We thought we were protecting you, but I see now that we were only making it harder. Emily nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling in. She had wanted a simple Christmas, a chance to be with her family, but instead she had been given a lesson in deception. As she stood there in the living room, the sounds of laughter still echoing in the background, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. She had come home, yes, but the trust that had once been the foundation of her family was now cracked, and she wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection as she stood in her family's living room, surrounded by the warmth of the fireplace and the laughter of her relatives. The festive lights twinkled on the tree, but the cheer around her only made the loneliness she felt in her heart more pronounced. She tried to smile and join in, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the lie, to the betrayal that had cracked the foundation of their family. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "We just wanted to surprise you," but Emily couldn't understand how a lie could be considered a surprise. Her siblings chatted among themselves, exchanging gifts and sharing inside jokes, but Emily felt like an outsider in her own home. She watched as her younger brother, Jason, opened the gift she had carefully selected for him, and for a moment she felt a pang of guilt for not being able to fully embrace the moment. It wasn't that she didn't want to be happy for them, but the hurt was still too fresh. Her mother, sensing the shift in Emily's mood, came over and gently placed her hand on Emily's arm. "Emily, please, let's not let this ruin the day. We're together and that's what matters, right?" Emily looked into her mother's eyes, searching for sincerity, but all she could see was guilt, a guilt that mirrored her own. "I just don't understand why you thought lying to me was the right thing to do," Emily said softly, her voice shaking with the weight of the question. Her mother's face tightened, and she glanced away for a moment as if gathering her thoughts. "I thought you'd be upset if we told you the truth, Em," she confessed. "You've been working so hard, and I didn't want you to feel obligated to come home if you didn't want to." Emily's heart sank. "So you thought it was better to lie and keep me in the dark? Why didn't you just ask me what I wanted?" Her mother sighed, clearly conflicted. "I just didn't want to disappoint you. I thought you might be too tired or too busy to come back. We wanted to create a space where you could just relax and not worry about anything." Emily shook her head, her mind swirling with frustration. "I don't want a space where I'm lied to. I want honesty. I want to feel like I'm a part of this family, not some afterthought." The room fell silent, and Emily could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. She wasn't sure if her mother fully understood the depth of what she was saying, but she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Her father, who had been watching from across the room, stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Emily, your mother didn't mean to hurt you. We all make mistakes, and we all want the same thing, for you to be happy and to feel loved." Emily turned to her father, but his words did little to comfort her. "You all want me to be happy, but you don't trust me enough to tell me the truth. If you really cared, you would have respected my ability to make my own decisions." Her father's face softened, and he stepped closer to her. "I know this is hard to understand, but we've always tried to do what's best for you. Sometimes we don't get it right, but we're here and we love you." Emily's chest tightened as she tried to process his words. She knew they loved her, but that didn't erase the hurt. It didn't erase the fact that they had made a decision for her without consulting her first. She felt the tears begin to well up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't sure if she was crying out of frustration, sadness, or a combination of both. "I don't know how to fix this," Emily whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I don't know how to go back to pretending everything is okay." Her mother reached out, her eyes filled with remorse. "Emily, we don't expect everything to be fixed right away, but I promise we will work through this together. I don't want you to feel like you can't trust us. We'll do better." Emily nodded, but the knot in her stomach remained. She wanted to believe her mother, but the damage had already been done. The lie, the secrecy, it had created a distance between them that she wasn't sure could be bridged. She glanced around the room, taking in the faces of her family. Her younger sister Lily was sitting by the window, watching the snow fall outside. She seemed completely unaware of the tension that had erupted moments earlier. Her father was speaking to Jason about something trivial, and her mother was still standing beside Emily, waiting for her to say something. Emily felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She didn't want to be the one to hold everything together anymore. She didn't want to be the one to make the peace. She just wanted her family to understand her, to know that the trust they had once shared was broken, and it wasn't something that could be easily fixed. As the night went on, Emily did her best to participate in the celebration, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation she had just had with her parents. They seemed to think that everything would just go back to normal, that with a few heartfelt apologies, they could mend the rift that had formed. But Emily wasn't so sure. How could they not see that the trust they had built over the years had been shattered? How could they think that a few words could erase the feeling of betrayal that still lingered in her chest? As the evening drew to a close, Emily found herself alone in the kitchen, the last remnants of the holiday feast spread out on the counter. The laughter and chatter from the living room felt like it was happening in a distant world, one that she no longer felt a part of. She stared out the window, watching the snow continue to fall in a gentle flurry. It was beautiful, serene, but it only made her feel more isolated. The world outside seemed to be untouched by the drama unfolding inside her home. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt truly alone. She had everything: family, a roof over her head, the promise of a good future, but it all felt empty. What good were these things if the foundation that held them together was crumbling? Emily took a deep breath, wiping away the stray tears that had fallen from her eyes. She wasn't sure what the future held for her or for her family, but she knew one thing for sure: things would never be the same. As she turned to head back into the living room, she took one last glance out the window. The snow was still falling, blanketing everything in a soft, white silence. It was the perfect metaphor for the way she felt. Everything seemed calm on the outside, but underneath there was a storm that no one could see. The days following Christmas were a blur for Emily. Despite the apology, despite the feigned cheer, things were different now, and she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that they would never truly go back to the way they were. Her parents tried, of course. They texted her more than usual, calling to check in, sending her photos of the family gatherings they had attended after Christmas Day. Her father invited her out to dinner. Her mother asked if she wanted to watch a movie with her, but Emily felt like she couldn't respond the way they wanted her to. She wasn't angry anymore, not in the way she had been on Christmas night, but the disappointment was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The hurt was like a wound that had been sewn up too quickly, no real healing had taken place. And every time she saw a picture or heard a story from the family, it felt like a fresh cut reopening. One evening, after a particularly tiring day at work, Emily sat down in her living room with a cup of tea, staring at the glow of her Christmas tree. The lights twinkled in a calm, soothing way, but the warmth they usually brought her now felt distant. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the texts from her family: her mother's apology, her father's reassurances, and Jason's casual message about a gift Emily had left behind. None of them felt real. They all seemed like desperate attempts to get her to move on, but she wasn't sure she was ready. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she could move on from this. Her family had been her support system, the people she turned to for love and guidance, but now it felt like they had betrayed her. No amount of texting, no matter how well-meaning, could undo the damage that had been done. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mother: "Hey honey, I miss you, let's have lunch soon, just the two of us, I really want to talk." Emily read the message twice, each time feeling the weight of her mother's words. She missed her, too. Despite the hurt, despite the confusion, she missed the closeness they had shared. But that closeness had been shattered, and Emily didn't know how to piece it back together. After a long pause, Emily typed a response: "I don't know, Mom, I'm still trying to figure things out." She pressed send, then stared at the screen, waiting for her mother's reply. The seconds stretched into minutes, and she could feel the silence between them thickening. When her phone buzzed again, Emily almost didn't want to look, but she did. Her mother's reply was short and to the point: "I understand, take your time." The words stung, but there was also a quiet relief in them. Emily wasn't ready to face her mother, but at least her mother wasn't pushing. She appreciated that, even though it didn't make the situation any easier. Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into her work. She buried herself in projects, meetings, and deadlines, anything to keep her mind occupied. It worked, sort of. Her work was a distraction, but it wasn't enough to silence the thoughts that echoed in the back of her mind: thoughts of her family, of the lie, of everything that had gone wrong. One night, as she sat at her desk, the weight of everything finally caught up with her. She had been working late into the evening when she received a call from her brother, Jason. She hadn't heard from him much since Christmas, and something in the tone of his voice made her pause. "Hey, Em," Jason said, his voice quieter than usual. "How are you doing?" Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I'm okay, you." Jason sighed, and she could hear the shift in his voice. "Look, I know things have been weird since Christmas, and I just wanted to check in. I'm sorry, too, for not being more supportive. I don't know what Mom and Dad were thinking. They shouldn't have kept you in the dark like that." His words took her by surprise. Jason was the youngest of her siblings, the one who usually stayed out of family drama. He was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to make everyone laugh to keep the atmosphere light. But now, hearing him admit that he understood her feelings, that he regretted the way things had gone, it made her realize just how deeply this had affected everyone. It's not just about being in the dark, Jay, Emily replied, her voice tight. It's about the trust, the lie, they didn't respect me enough to tell me the truth. I don't know how to forgive that. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I get it, I really do, but you don't have to forgive them right now or ever if you're not ready. Just don't shut us out. We're all here for you, Em. We messed up. We're family and we should have handled it better. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could fix things, but part of her was terrified that things would never be the same again. I don't know, Jason. I don't know how to go back to how things were. Jason's voice softened. You don't have to, you just have to let us be here, and when you're ready, we'll figure it out together. The sincerity in his voice made something inside Emily break, but in a way, it was a relief. She didn't have to carry this burden alone. Her family might have made a huge mistake, but they were still her family. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Thanks, Jay, Emily whispered. I'll think about it. As Emily ended the call, she felt a mixture of emotions swirl within her. The conversation had been long overdue, but it had opened a door she hadn't known she was ready to walk through. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something that could happen overnight, but with time, maybe they could start healing the wounds they had inflicted on one another. The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of resolve she hadn't had in a while. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be fast, but she was willing to try. She had spent so much time focusing on the hurt, on the betrayal, that she had forgotten what mattered most: her family. Maybe they didn't have all the answers. Maybe they couldn't undo what had been done, but they were still her family, and that, Emily realized, was something worth fighting for. Emily woke up the next morning feeling different, slightly lighter, but still burdened by the weight of everything that had happened. The phone call with Jason had opened something inside her, a door that she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through, but there was a part of her that felt a sense of hope, however small. She had spent days wrestling with her emotions, torn between wanting to forgive and the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that she couldn't ignore. Her family, the people she had once trusted more than anyone else, had broken that trust in a way that felt almost irreparable. But Jason's words had lingered with her: we're family and we should have handled it better. As much as Emily didn't want to admit it, Jason was right. They were family, and despite everything, that bond meant something. She didn't know if she could forgive them yet, but she realized that she wasn't ready to cut them off entirely either. But the questions lingered. Why had her parents thought it was okay to lie to her? What made them believe that they were doing the right thing? The answers didn't come easily, and Emily wasn't sure if they ever would. She spent the day walking around the city, trying to clear her head. The streets were crowded with holiday shoppers, the usual hustle and bustle of the city, but Emily felt like an outsider looking in. She was still processing everything, still trying to make sense of the situation. Her mind kept drifting back to Christmas Day, to the moment when everything had fallen apart. It wasn't just the lie, it was the fact that they had made a decision for her without her. They had assumed that they knew what was best for her, and in doing so, they had disregarded her ability to make her own choices. As she walked through the crowded streets, Emily found herself on the verge of tears. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to be the person who let everything get to her, but the emotion bubbled up anyway. It was too much to carry alone. But as the tears threatened to spill, she remembered what Jason had said: we'll figure it out together. For the first time in a while, Emily felt a glimmer of hope that maybe things didn't have to stay broken forever. By the time she returned home, the evening was settling in and the city had begun to quiet down. The glow of the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, casting a soft, golden light on everything it touched. Emily stood at the threshold of her apartment, hesitating before she stepped inside. She had made it through the day, but she still felt conflicted. A part of her wanted to reach out to her family, to call her mother and tell her that she was ready to talk, but another part of her was afraid that it was too soon, that the hurt was still too raw. She sat down at her desk and stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had been avoiding her family's messages, not knowing how to respond, but now she found herself wanting to reach out, to take the first step toward rebuilding what had been lost. As her fingers began to type, Emily realized that this wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust wasn't something that could happen overnight. It would take time, patience, and effort on both sides, but the first step was acknowledging that she wanted to try. She paused for a moment before sending the message. She wasn't sure if it was the right time, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Hey Mom, I've been thinking about everything, I think I'm ready to talk. She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. The message felt like a lifeline, a small but significant step toward healing. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was a start. Her phone buzzed almost immediately, and when she looked at the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from her mother. "I'm so glad to hear that, sweetie. I've been thinking about you a lot. Whenever you're ready, I'm here." Emily felt a rush of relief wash over her, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It wasn't a perfect solution, and she wasn't sure what would happen next, but at least they were taking the first step toward understanding one another again. Over the next few days, Emily and her mother began to have deeper conversations. They talked about what had happened, the hurt they had both experienced, and the reasons behind the lie. Emily listened to her mother's perspective, and though it didn't erase the pain, it gave her a better understanding of where her mother had been coming from. But it wasn't just her mother's apology that began to heal the wounds. It was the conversations that followed, the raw honesty that they shared. Emily realized that her mother had acted out of love, even if that love had manifested in the wrong way. As the days turned into weeks, Emily started to feel a shift. It wasn't a dramatic change, but little by little, things started to feel less broken. She didn't feel as angry, didn't feel as betrayed. There was still work to be done, still trust to be rebuilt, but she wasn't carrying the weight of the hurt alone anymore. One evening, Emily sat down with her father. They talked about the past, about their relationship, and the ways they had both contributed to the distance between them. It was difficult but necessary. Emily realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, it was about choosing to move forward. Her father apologized too, and though it wasn't a perfect apology, it was enough. Emily knew that they were both trying, and that meant more than anything. The more she spoke with her family, the more Emily realized that forgiveness wasn't a single moment, a single decision. It was a process. It was about healing, about letting go of the past in order to create a future together. And slowly that process began. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Emily doubted herself, when the old wounds felt too fresh to heal. But she kept moving forward, kept reaching out, and over time she saw the changes. Her family wasn't perfect, and neither was she, but they were learning, growing, and trying to understand each other better, and that, Emily realized, was all she could ask for. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table with her mother, laughing over a cup of tea, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the warmth of the room or the tea, it was the warmth of connection, of understanding, of knowing that things were going to be okay, even if they weren't perfect. Emily had learned that family wasn't just about the good times, the easy moments. It was about weathering the storms together, about finding your way back to each other when the world seemed to tear you apart. And as she sat there with her family by her side, she knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. Emily sat in her favorite chair by the window, staring out at the cloudy sky, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't seem to untangle. The past few weeks had been a blur of conversations, apologies, and attempts at understanding, and she still wasn't sure where she stood with her family, especially her mother. It wasn't that she hadn't forgiven them, but the distance between them felt like an insurmountable mountain that she couldn't quite climb. The family had tried, they had all tried, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost. It wasn't just the lie that had been told, though that was a part of it. It was the fact that they had thought they knew what was best for her, that they had made decisions for her without ever asking her what she truly needed. She wasn't a child anymore. She was an adult capable of making her own choices, yet they still saw her as the same girl who had been protected and sheltered all those years. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen to see a text from her father. "How are you doing, Em? Haven't heard from you in a few days. Let's grab coffee sometime soon." Emily stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to respond, wanted to reconnect, but another part of her was still hesitant, still unsure if things would ever go back to the way they had been. She thought about the conversations she had had with him and her mother, how they had apologized, how they had explained themselves, but it all felt like an attempt to patch up a crack that ran too deep. She set the phone back down and let out a long sigh. The tension in her chest, the tightness that had been there since Christmas, hadn't eased. It still gnawed at her, a reminder of everything that had happened and everything that was left unresolved. She knew they were trying, but she couldn't help but feel that the damage was permanent. The doorbell rang, startling her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment she wondered if she should ignore it. But curiosity got the best of her, and she rose from her chair and walked toward the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to find her mother standing there, her face soft with concern. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice warm but hesitant. "Can we talk?" Emily stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She had been avoiding her mother, unsure of how to continue their conversations after everything that had happened. But seeing her mother standing there, looking as vulnerable as she had ever seen her, something in Emily shifted. "Sure," Emily said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come in." Her mother entered the apartment slowly, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Emily. She looked tired, her face lined with the stress of the past few weeks, and Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," her mother began, sitting down on the couch. About what happened, about the things we said to you, I want you to know how sorry I am. We made a huge mistake and I can't take it back, but I want to make things right, Em. I don't want to lose you. Emily sat down across from her, her eyes focused on her mother. I don't know how to forgive you, Mom, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You lied to me, you told me Christmas was canceled and I spent it alone. I didn't understand why, and when I found out the truth, it felt like everything I thought I knew about our family wasn't real. Her mother looked down at her hands, her eyes filled with regret. I know, and I'm sorry. We thought we were doing what was best for you, but we didn't give you the chance to make that decision yourself. I should have asked you what you needed. I should have trusted you more, but I didn't, and I regret that more than anything. The silence between them stretched on, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Emily's chest tightened as she listened to her mother's words, the rawness of her apology cutting through the walls Emily had built around her heart. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but there was a part of her that wanted to more than anything. I don't want to feel like this anymore, Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to keep holding on to the anger, I don't know how to let go. Her mother reached out, her hand resting gently on Emily's. You don't have to forgive me right away, Em. I understand that it's going to take time, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'll be here whenever you're ready. Emily nodded, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. She hadn't realized how much she needed this, how much she needed to hear her mother say those words. It wasn't the perfect resolution. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a step forward, and that was all she could ask for. I've missed you, Mom, Emily whispered. I've missed us. Her mother's eyes softened and she pulled Emily into an embrace, holding her tightly. I've missed you too, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily realized that forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed. It wasn't a moment, a single decision, it was a process. But this was the beginning of that process, the first step in rebuilding the trust that had been lost. It would take time, it would take patience. But for the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she was on the right path. The next few weeks passed in a blur of small steps forward. Emily continued to spend time with her mother and father, talking about the things that had been left unsaid for so long. They didn't rush the process, didn't try to force everything back to normal. They simply let things unfold at their own pace. And as the days went by, Emily found that the weight in her chest began to lift. The anger and the hurt were still there, but they weren't as heavy as they once had been. They were manageable, and with each conversation, with each small act of forgiveness, they grew lighter. One evening, as Emily sat with her mother watching a movie on the couch, she felt a warmth settle over her. It wasn't the same as it had been before, there was still work to be done, still healing to take place, but it was something, it was progress, and that was enough for now. I'm glad we're doing this, Emily said, her voice soft but steady. I'm glad we're trying. Her mother smiled, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. Me too, sweetheart, me too. As Emily sat there, the feeling of hope slowly returned, not in an overwhelming wave, but in a quiet, steady presence. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held for her and her family. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally on the road to healing, and that was enough.